It's very unlikely that wolves will ever get here back to Colorado on their own. The political landscape, the cultural landscape is just not conducive. It's just not going to enable wolves to move across the geography as they would if people were more amenable to wolves. So in the South, the Mexican gray wolf is not allowed by law to move north of I-40. They would love to move north of I-40. That's where their habitat is, up into Colorado. So they can't get here because of federal restrictions. To the north, the wolves up in Wyoming would have to move across a political landscape that is a gauntlet of guns, a gauntlet of fracking and roads that makes it very unlikely that wolves are ever going to be able to move back into Colorado on their own. A few lone wolves have actually moved into Colorado on their own over the past 20 years, but there's only about 6. Each of those wolves has either been hit by a car on I-70 or it's been trapped with the trapper thought that they were out trapping coyotes, or they've been shot. So it's very unlikely that they're going to move through Wyoming, down into Colorado, or even move through Utah. Utah is about as hostile to wolves as is Wyoming. In my opinion, there is no data that supports that sort of activity concerning wolves. Wolves have not been documented in the last 100 years to have attacked humans. Their impact on livestock is so minimal. 0.002% of the livestock in the northern Rockies are predated by wolves, of the cattle. 0.02% of the sheep have been predated by wolves. Yes, if that is your sheep or if those are your cattle, that's important. And there are compensation programs that help people deal with that. More importantly, there are effective coexistence strategies if only people would implement them. So here in Colorado, we are preparing ahead of time to try to get ranchers to think about coexistence with carnivores. Instead of having to shoot them after they've killed your sheep or cow, let's prevent that in the first place. We need to step back just a little bit and explain how we got here in the first place. Why we don't have wolves in Colorado. Wolves and most carnivores were extirpated at the behest of the livestock industry so that the industry could let their livestock roam out on the landscape unsupervised, so that if there weren't cowboys around, they would be attacked by the carnivores, wolves, lions, bears. So the simple strategy that the ranchers used, complicit with the federal government, was to simply wipe out all the carnivores. Poison, trap, shoot, wrangle, so that the landscape was free of predators, so that they could let their livestock roam. So livestock didn't need to revert to its typical behavior. So the typical behavior of a wild bison or wild cattle would be to herd up when carnivores are around. That way they're protected. One strategy that's really important, that's working really well, is to reinstitute that behavior. So teaching your cattle to herd up rather than spread out when there's predators around. Muskox, they circle up and they protect their young. When livestock are all together in a herd, wolves don't attack. When cowboys or cowgirls are around, wolves don't come around. Wolves are afraid of humans. They don't like humans. They've learned their lesson. So using some very simple strategies, for instance, teaching your cattle to tight herd, using cowboys and cowgirls. Simple things like don't let your calves out into the pasture until they're a little bit older. Calves are what are primarily attacked as far as cattle go. the large cows and the large steers aren't attacked, it's the young ones. So waiting just a little bit until you release those calves out into pasture is really a very simple but important strategy. Getting rid of the dead cattle that die naturally out in the field. So removing the carcasses. Carcass removal is a really important, simple strategy. A carcass to a carnivore is a free meal. I believe that we need to bring the grassroots to the understanding of the importance of wolf reintroduction. The grassroots is what's going to drive the decision by the politicians to restore wolves. We also need to remember that wolves are going to be primarily on the west slope of Colorado. Our population in Colorado is primarily on the Front Range, on the east slope. So we can't limit ourselves to just the general public. We also need to reach out and provide information about the facts, about the documented science behind the last 4 decades of wolf research to the ranchers, to the community on the west slope, which is going to experience the wolves in their backyards. We need to include all of the public in the discussion. We need to include the people on the Front Range who go into these mountains to enjoy the wilderness. These lands are our lands. These are public lands where the wolves are going to be roaming. All of us have a vested interest in restoring the entire community of life. I think it's essential that we look at the facts, that we look at the documented facts, that we don't listen just to the rhetoric. What the facts document is that as far as human safety goes, there is no concern. If we look at the national parks like Yellowstone National Park, where there are wolves and where people are camping in tents for since 1995, there's been about 2.5 million camper tent nights. There's not been a single negative interaction with wolves. Same kind of concepts up in Algonquin National Park. There is no documented negative interactions between humans and wolves. If we look at the documentation between wolves and livestock, we can look at the numbers. Yes, the individual producers that are impacted are going to be necessarily, we need to compensate them. But on the other hand, if we look at the livestock industry, the producers, yes, some livestock are going to be eaten by wolves, absolutely. But the numbers are so small. The individual livestock producer needs to be compensated, absolutely. But if we step back and if we get that livestock producer to use coexistence strategies, which have proven to be effective, we can reduce the depredation and the economic loss to those producers to almost zero. Those producers, whether it's sheep or cattle, those producers that use coexistence strategies have documentation that depredation does not occur. So with sheep, we're using guard dogs, we're using night penning, we're using flattery, and those strategies have proven effective. On a positive economic note, we can point to the economic benefits of tourism. Ecotourism, coming to hear and see wolves. I would love to hear the howl of the wolf in the little Crystal River Valley that I live in, which had wolves, which no longer has wolves. So the economic benefit of having wolves back is hugely beneficial, and there's been no documented downside. Let's step back and look at the role of wolves in ecosystems. Wolves can't do it on their own. They can't restore ecosystems on their own, but they are an essential, integral component to ecosystem function. You use the term keystone, and that term, of course, comes from architecture, which holds, it's the keystone that holds the arch together. All of the pieces are essential. That's why I say wolves can't do it on their own. But unless you have that arch stone, that keystone in the arch, the whole thing falls apart. And in Colorado, what we've seen is the degradation of our ecosystems because we don't have that integral component to initiate these cascades of effects. So cascades of effects that enhance ecosystem health, moderating elk populations, moderating deer populations, removing the diseased so that the populations of ungulates get healthier. The beauty of Colorado, the spectacular populations of elk, the landscapes with this healthy vegetation is a legacy of the wolf. We are living off of that legacy, but we are fast diminishing what was in the bank. What the wolf banked is rapidly being diminished because of their absence. So no, I don't think we're overstating it, but it's important to remember that it's not going to be just one wolf in 1 year that restores our ecosystems in Colorado. It's going to take a robust population that is here for a sufficient amount of time and is sufficiently distributed across the ecosystems on the west slope to have that impact. A really critical topic concerning wolf management when we do get wolves back into Colorado is whether or not hunting of wolves should be allowed. What the recent research is showing us very clearly, and what evolution shows us very clearly, is that the single most important advantage that wolves have, the single most important behavior that wolves have that enables their success is their ability to act as a family. The structure of the pack is what enables wolves to survive. Hunting destroys that family structure. Hunting is indiscriminate in typically often taking out the adults that are crucial to the success of the family. Wolf families pass on their knowledge of what and where and how to hunt, and in a very practical way for those that oppose wolf reintroduction, and if they do oppose it, they would be supportive of hunting. What the science has documented is that when families are broken up, depredation on livestock actually increases. Keeping that family together is essential for the success of those families. What you see in areas where wolves are not persecuted by humans, what you see in places like Yellowstone, is that those families stay together for longer, for even up to 10 to 12 years, that the families are larger so that the cohesiveness is greater, that there are more generations within the family. Everything about the wolf is about the family. You know, they're not very well adapted physically to what they do. They're much smaller than a 700 or 800 pound elk. They weigh in at about 100 pounds. Their structure, they're not built for taking down large critters. What they need is they need to act together. When they're split up, what they typically do is turn to the easiest thing to take down, which is often a sheep or a cow. When they're together, they tend to learn that sheep and cattle are not their prey, that wild ungulates are their prey. I think that the only way gray wolves are going to be restored to Colorado is through deliberate human reintroduction. We need to dispel the myths that drive the fear about wolves. We need to bring the facts of wolves and their importance to the ecosystem, ecological health in Colorado. We need to get out that message that wolves are essential and they're easy to live with. Wolves are essential to our ecology. Beyond that, It's nice, it's fabulous when we can point to all of the benefits of a critter, but the inherent value of the animal is also an important consideration. They give us, yes, they give us humans huge benefit with their ecological engineering capacity, but their inherent value as life is also important. We've got to remember that we were the ones that were responsible for their loss through our fear, through our misunderstanding, and through our desire to conquer the landscape. That's why we got rid of them in the first place. I feel that we have an obligation to bring them back, and the only way that reasonably that's going to happen is with a deliberate reintroduction.